we need to give our younger people more airtime. We have these generational divides, and they create conflict between the different generations in terms of communication. So the more older senior people think that the junior younger people don't understand how to communicate. It's not that they don't understand how to communicate; they just do it differently. And I think we have to be open to how younger people are choosing to express themselves and convey their ideas, because they are the ones that's going to make our army better.
Team, welcome back to another week here with Drew and Alex and the Mops and Mo's podcast. Happy to have you. Alex, thanks for coming on the show.
It's great to be here, Drew. It's always nice when you invite me on the show.
Yeah, happy to have you. Okay, so here's what happened. So I went to a chiropractor today, which longtime listeners might be scoffing at me because we've talked to chiropractors, anti-chiropractor people in the past, but
Anti-chiropractor, chiropractor.
yes, but so what happened was I was laying on the traction table, which for folks that don't know, basically they like strap your neck to this thing and they like yank you slowly. It feels really
Mhm.
good, but
Have you seen that meme? It's like the medieval torture devices, and there's probably like a sweet spot during the torture where it feels
yeah,
super good.
the bit on side note, if you guys want some funny stuff, look up Wim Hof Titanic bit. Did I send you that one?
I think you might have. I'm not sure.
Right before it's these two Australian comedians
Oh, yeah. You did send me
right
that.
before everyone drowned, they had like optimum health.
Yeah. Perfect cold plunge.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, there I was sitting on this traction table, and you're in like an open room with curtains and stuff, so you can hear everything. And this guy gets up to leave, and the lady working there, she goes, "Be safe out there," or no, be careful out there. Like just a casual, "Be careful out there." Like, do you ever get that from people? Because I get that sometimes. People are like, "Oh, be careful out there," as though I'm stepping out into a war zone, and it's Pinehurst, North Carolina. Like, why are we saying that to each other? That's terrifying.
I don't I don't get like the be careful out there, like stepping out into the world thing very often. The version of that I hate is when I'm like telling people what I do for workouts and they're like, "Oh, be careful." Uh, More people get messed up from not exercising than do from
So you've
exercising.
never had anybody close out a conversation with you and be like, "Oh, stay safe out there.
I guess.
Be careful." I was sitting there like, what happened to you in your life where you've
There's like get home safe or whatever. I mean, driving on a highway is the most dangerous thing any of us do in most of our lives.
I guess. I don't know why for me it just feels overly like,
People don't realize how statistically horrifically dangerous highway driving is in America.
well, yeah, I don't
Like more
think
dangerous than
about
being a deployed infantryman overseas in combat.
I've never hit a person. I've hit a deer. So that was dangerous. Should have stayed safe out there.
Yeah, you should have.
Should have
If
should have been
somebody had told
careful.
you before you left to stay safe out
I
there, you
know.
would not have
Damn
hit
it.
that deer.
Speaking though, I think of safety.
I don't think you have a transition here, man.
Speaking
I
of
don't think you got this one.
organizational effectiveness, who are we talking to today?
This one I say long overdue all the time.
You don't do
Uh,
it.
and
This we literally just thought of this right before we did it.
So this is less long overdue and more like dangerously close to an exception. Longtime listeners to the show may have heard us mention rule number one, which is also the only rule we have on the podcast. And I'll actually say this because I don't know. There are people out there who clearly don't know about rule number one and slide into my emails or DMs. If you're one of those people, rule number one, the only rule of the Mops Most podcast is you can't come on the podcast if you ask to come on the podcast.
Friendly tip: have a friend refer you, then you bypass
Yeah,
rule number one.
exactly. It's
Very
pretty
easy to
easy.
do. Very easy to do.
Sean's a unique case. Because Shawn never technically asked to come on the podcast, but once you like hear Shawn a little bit and get the vibe of who he is, this won't shock you if people out there know him. He kind of told me I had to bring him on the podcast, which technically isn't a violation of rule number one.
No, that's like a flex on rule number one.
But he's sort of right. He was a fantastic guest. Also, we had to do it after we had General Gilland on because Shawn was previously General Gilland's aide, and Shawn and I know each other. So this is like a little bit of a follow up to that one. We talk about some similar issues with like leadership and character development and things like that. So I guess I should actually say who he is.
Please.
Major Shawn Robertson is an Atlanta, Georgia native. His wife, also a major, but she's in the Air Force, Jordan Robertson. And without going into detail, I do claim a tiny bit of credit for their relationship. Shawn will know why. And they now have 3 kids together, Ezekiel, Ishvi, and Zachariah. Shawn did not put this in his bio, but I'm adding it, and you'll hear about why in the episode. Shawn was enlisted as an 88 Mike before commissioning via the Green to Gold program through the University of Hawaii, where he earned his Bachelor of Science in psychology. Shawn also holds a Master of Arts in Organizational Psychology from Columbia University and a Master of Arts in Defense and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. Upon completion of the Military Intelligence Basic Officer Leaders course, where I met Shawn, we were classmates there together. Technically, during Bolek, I beat him in a combatives match, even though he's much bigger and stronger than me, but that's only because he had just had surgery. He absolutely should not have been fighting, but he was very mad at me and wanted to hurt me. But when you've just had wisdom teeth removed, it's kind of really easy to make somebody stop fighting
Yeah,
you.
still, even after having him on the episode, I still don't know if you guys are friends or not.
I mean, I use the term frenemies sometimes. I like Shawn a lot, but we've disagreed on many things over the years.
It's good, as you should.
I mean, you guys will see in the episode. We can disagree and still be productive.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, after Bolek, he was assigned to a 173rd Infantry Brigade combat team in Vicenza, Italy. While there, he served as Assistant Battalion Intelligence Officer for 1st Battalion 503rd Infantry Regiment and Humant and Sigint Platoon Leader in the Military Intelligence Company. Also deployed with 1st Battalion 75th Ranger Regiment as an individual augmentee in support of Operation Freedom Sentinel in Afghanistan as one of the deputy J2s. After going to Maneuver Captain's Career Course, so people will know, not super well known, but officers can go to like different career courses. So he chose to go to Maneuver Captain's Career Course. He also went to the Signals Intelligence / Electronic Warfare course at Fort Huachuca, often called the Gulf Course. He was assigned to the National Security Agency, NSA, where he served as the Technical Production Operations Officer in the Army Technical Control and Analysis element, and as the Bravo Company Commander leading the NSA's Special Operations Detachment in support of combat operations. Went on to complete grad school and the Eisenhower Leader Development Program, which led to him being a TAC officer at West Point, focusing on leadership and character development, and then as aide de camp for the Commanding General and Superintendent of USMA, General Gilland, who was our guest a few weeks ago. And he is now serving as a commander in the United States Army Special Operations Command.
I hate when we have people on there in the same sort of age range as me, and then their bios like 45 minutes long.
Military bios are great, man.
I guess, man, good
and it
for
does make
you.
Shawn sound really cool.
Well, that's the thing. Shawn is really cool, and we mentioned this, I think, in the outro. When we have guests on, we tend to have a Google Doc open on the side that only Alex and I can see, and we'll keep notes in real time. We'll kind of communicate back and forth. We'll plan some questions and things like that. And we had some questions planned for Shawn, but I don't think we added a single thing
No,
to that Google Doc,
we
which
didn't
is
communicate on the doc. We just had a conversation.
which is to say that this is, I think, of all the episodes we've done, probably the most authentic conversation,
Mhm.
literally happening in real time. And I don't think that's a credit to either you or me. I think that's largely a credit to Shawn.
100%.
An absolute Jedi master in terms of organizational psychology, what it takes to change a culture, all of the things that I think if you're like a cerebral human performance person, you should be thinking about these things. I think a lot of times we get lost in the sauce of should we have tactical athletes do front squats or back squats, but the conversation you're about to hear with Shawn is, I would argue, probably more, certainly as important, if not more important than those conversations. And so again, massive shout out to Shawn. I will also add that Shawn is shredded.
Mhm.
Just to drive some traffic to the website, a little teaser for the people. He was kind enough to send us some of his bodybuilding photos, so I will include those in this week's show notes on the website if you guys want.
They'll make an appearance on the Instagram too. I promise.
We'll call it a thirst trap. It'll be on the website. You know where to find it. So yeah.
And I'll say Shawn is possibly the most motivated person I know.
Too motivated. Like I felt like I should be more motivated talking to him. It's like,
I mean, I think that's part of the magic of Shawn.
maybe that is true.
Oftentimes when people are like pursuing the career and super, super motivated and things like that, they lose connection with like the practical realities of things. They start to pretend things are better than they are, things like that. Shawn, despite his comical levels of motivation, still possesses the ability to like keep it real about what the problems are and like where we're at and how we fix them and things like that. So I appreciated him being able to do both, as they say.
Yeah, and so With all that being said, team, join us this week for Keeping It Real with Shawn Robertson.
I think Shawn and I disagree on a lot of things, but in a lighthearted, friendly way. I
Oh
think
my
the place
goodness.
to start, and Shawn and I were talking a couple hours ago about this. We had some conversations on recent episodes. We had the General Gilland conversation, we had the Ray Casio conversation, and Ray Casio very specifically and strongly voiced his opinion that physical training is not leadership development. It's just not good for that. And I have a feeling that Shawn has a slightly different opinion on the topic. Shawn said he hopes we don't get in a fight. I mean, maybe we will. We'll see what happens.
Wait,
But
so are you
Yeah.
well, Alex, what's your position?
I think I always fall in the middle of these spectrums. I don't take one side or the other of the spectrum. I think I have absolutely seen the effectiveness of physical training get thrown out the window with the excuse of it's for leadership development and we got to get these people ready for BLC or ALC or whatever it is and learn PRT. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where you completely take it away from NCOs and make it all about the effectiveness of the training with just the coaches. That might not be the answer either because you're not always going to have coaches. So I kind of fall somewhere in the middle of the whole conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think this is a binary conversation. And I listened to Ray's pitch, which he seems incredible, by the way. I do think most of what he said is valid. And I tend to agree that as a, PT isn't specifically for leader development, but on the periphery, you do get some leader development. In fact, you get some unit development. So I guess we need to. I would like us to be clear on what the discussion is. Is it organized PT? Is it allowing an external member who's more certified on leading PT to lead PT? Like, what exactly are we discussing?
I mean, I think all of those are part of the conversation because that's stuff we've run into. One is commanders who are uncomfortable with civilian coaches leading actual training sessions because they think NCOs should do that. Another big one, we haven't talked about this in the podcast in a while, but the idea that, and it's, you can still find the language in FM 7-22 about like sustaining phase. There's this idea that PT is not supposed to make you more fit. It just sustains
What?
your current fitness and everything else is up to you. That is a
Who
real
said that?
persistent, that is an actual persistent idea out in the army.
That
Like
might
you will
be one of the
hear,
dumbest things I've heard on this podcast.
listen, listen, it is
That's
out there.
like
I
saying
promise it's
going to
out
the
there.
range to shoot is not meant to make you better. It just keeps your gun warm. That is
I mean,
dumb.
Drew said it. That I agree
Yeah,
with that.
Sorry, I just
yeah.
butted myself in there. Keep going.
So I guess if I may, I'd like to first address
You
the
may.
or the organized PT argument. Um, well, I think that PT is a vehicle. It's like organized PT is a platform. And what it does is it offers the unit, the leadership within that unit to adequately assess their people, right? If I'm going on a run in an organized manner and I'm going at a 9 minute mile pace, which is the Army standard written doctrinally, and one of my, unit members or teammates were to fall out, like that's a point of friction. That's where we're going to run toward and we're going to assess and get a better understanding of why this member fell out. Maybe they had family issues or, or another example is people coming to PT, showing up to PT. What's your attitude? And what are the NCOs or what are the people in your formation doing about these attitudes and how do they shape a better tomorrow? So a lot of it's not just leader development, it's unit development. You can't assess what you don't see. So being there all together in one space, and you've all heard a team that sucks together stays together. So it's just a part of that dynamic that exists as a unit being out there for organized PT. And if you decentralize this thing, if you make it more about, hey, I want you to individually be be great. Well, we don't do anything, or most things we do in the Army is as teams or groups or platoons or formations. We don't do anything as an individual. We can make time for that. There's an entire day of an opportunity for individuals to get their individual PT for their personal growth that's more tailored to what they got going on. But as a unit, for a unit to be effective, for you to assess your organization, I think there's a utility to organize PT. If I remember correctly, Ray, he did argue that he said, hey, a couple of people or a couple of sessions a week shouldn't harm your ability to develop your leaders. I agree with him. But I'll tell you, these civilian reps aren't deploying with us, right? And they're not going to be out in these remote sites doing their, PT sessions, right? I need to train my organization, my formation to function on its own. So I think there is a utility, there's some connective tissue. But overall, we strive to be self-sufficient because that's just what we do, and we do it as teams.
So I gotta display a little ignorance potentially, and I say this leading into a potential gotcha. We'll see. But you said 9-minute mile pace is the Army standard.
Oh God, did you pull up a doctrine right now?
I want to know. I want to know where it's doctrinally the standard because I've read a lot of Army fitness doctrine. I know there's a 4x36 standard at various courses that people have to meet. OCS definitely has a 9-minute mile for 4 miles standard. I've seen it a few other places. Where is it the Army standard?
Yeah, so doctrine, as you know, can be prescriptive or descriptive. So, I mean, I think descriptively it's expected, it's written. I've seen it somewhere. I can't quote it exactly, but it is described somewhere out in Army. And if you were to ask a general private, and I know you're a fact-based person, Alex, and maybe I'll circle back and let you know where that exists. But
well, I'm curious about it specifically because you can pass an ACFT now with an 11-minute mile pace on your 2 mile, and I think that's problematic. I think that says something terrible about the cardiovascular fitness of our Army. But that seems like the Army decided the standard is 11 minutes, not 9. And I don't like we've talked a lot on here about the pendulum swinging. Like, yes, we should value strength more than we used to in the APFT era, but it should not be so much at the expense of cardiovascular fitness that a 22-minute 2 mile is passing. Like, that's a problem. I don't know.
I think all the things that I agree with a lot of what Shawn is saying. I think the issue at hand, being as I see this every day in like my day job, is that the Army, really all the branches, are spending a lot of money to put professionals in place to provide some guidance when it comes to PT. And I know at different levels, different branches, that looks different. I mean, there's some cases where no shit, that guy or gal is programming every single day. They're on the floor in the gym, they're training. There's others where it's more of a consulting role. I think the issue that we keep running into though is that civilians, by and large, are stepping into a company commander's office and saying, "Hey, I'm here to basically take over PT." And maybe that's a little bit too aggressive of a phrasing, but and that the rebuttal is always like, "Well, no, leading PT is like you said, a sort of leadership development tool." And I think that it kind of throws the baby out with the bathwater because all the things that you said make a lot of sense. Going on a group run, dude falls out, fix that problem. What's the deal? Yada, yada, yada. But in my opinion, the problem happens well before that when that group run is being prescribed by somebody who went to like, I don't know how long the H2F thing is now, 2 days, 3 days, a 1-day course, who knows, versus a guy or a gal who has a master's degree and this kind of thing. That to me, like, let that person lead, program, whatever, PT, and then turn it over to the soldiers to maybe like facilitate it. I don't know. It just seems like we're not even getting past the starting line because there's this cultural issue.
Yeah, I've not seen that, Drew, where
I see it every day.
A sitting company commander is
Yeah.
going to say no to a resource to
Mhm.
help their formation perform better.
Dude, battalion commanders are saying no. Hey, you're not allowed to coach. That's my NCO's job. That happens all the time. And it's weird because we've talked about this before on the podcast. It might have been on Ray's episode. The military very easily turns over a lot of their training to civilian experts, marksmanship, I don't know, land nav, insert,
Yeah.
whatever. But for some reason, when it comes to PT, like, don't touch that. even though it's our leading mechanism of injury, it costs us the most dollars on the back end. They refuse to open up sort of the cultural window to say, hey, let's let these guys, again, not take over, but play a large role.
Yeah, so out of curiosity, Drew, and I know I'm the visitor here, but question for you is what's the barrier in your assessment?
Culture, old school mentality. Like I think some of it has to do, and I'm like shooting from the hip here, but on the one hand, you have the ACFT, right? And you're dealing with a lot of senior leaders who come from APFT world, where running and doing sit-ups and push-ups is all you really needed. And I don't know if that population really understands the complexity of what it means to train productively for an ACFT. So maybe they assume that because in their day, NCOs could lead PT and it was this great thing. Now it's a little bit more complicated. That might have something to do with it. But truthfully, I think a lot of it boils down to, oh, they're civilians. They don't understand us. They don't wear a uniform. They don't get it. And maybe that's true,
Mhm.
but go into any sporting environment. Like I never played professional rugby, but I helped train the rugby team in Scotland. I mean, Panthers are a bad example because they suck at football, but like the Chiefs weight room is being run by non-football players. So, there's all these examples where civilian experts are coming in because they're the experts and they're allowed to come in and change the culture. But for some reason, the military is kind of like pushes back on that, I think is what I would
I'll
say.
present a potential theory.
Please.
And like I've worked on the Army side of this, I've worked another branch now, seen a little bit of it. I think a piece of the problem is people in the military have had a lot of experience with the types of resources the military provides to them, and they have grown skeptical. And they have grown skeptical in particular of Department of the Army civilians because they've been done wrong on a number of occasions, right?
It's always like the HR civilian that they reference.
There's a lot of examples of it, but they've had experiences with civilians who weren't particularly excited about what they do, weren't particularly excited to help the soldiers who come in to see them, not seen as the subject matter experts in their thing. And I think and this is where we come back to the conversation about like parts of this is the Army needing to adapt, and parts of this is the human performance staff needing to adapt to the Army's culture a little bit. But a lot of coaches come in being like, oh, cool, I have some letters after my name. I have a master's degree. All these people should respect me. And that's not how respect is earned. Like, you don't tell people to respect you or show them your resume and get respected. You like earn respect from people. And I think a piece of this is how do we overcome the skepticism of leaders who aren't sure about this new resource? They've never seen this before. This is weird. Civilians don't normally come to PT formation at 6:30. What's going on? Like, and that's why we see like a lot of the coaches who do have a lot of success overcoming those hurdles are the guys who just go out on these runs with the soldiers, prove they can do the thing the soldiers are doing, ideally prove they can do some of the fitness stuff better than the soldiers are doing it, and that's when the soldiers start to listen. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, I appreciate both of your perspectives on this. I think the friction might lie somewhere else. So, Drew, you talked about culture. So Edgar Schein is the godfather of culture. So what are we saying? Because there's a difference between climate and culture, right? The way that I coach this is if we're looking at a thermometer, the thermometer, the actual tangible thing is culture. Like it's hard to change. And then you have the thermometer which reads the temperature, that's climate. Climate changes. You put it in different environments, it's going to change. It's like this transactional thing. So culture is fixed. It's almost fixed. It's entrenched. It's very difficult to change. And there are three facets of culture. And just go with me here. I got a point. So you got espoused and enacted values. What you say doesn't mirror what you do. Then you have artifacts. You could walk around someone's organization. We talk about PT. Uh, are they competitive? You could see that. And then you have what you can't see, the underlying assumptions. This is a part of culture that drives a lot of organizations, and people try to change it, but they don't understand the underlying assumptions. So in this case with PT, I think that maybe these commanders or leaders are looking at PT. It goes back to our initial argument. They don't look at PT as a opportunity for the unit members to necessarily perform better in that thing. They look at it as an opportunity for you to get more cohesive as a unit, and that is prioritized over the actual physical fitness component.
I
Listeners
think
won't know that
I think that's a
Shawn
good
is
point.
wearing a Columbia sweatshirt and has a master's of organizational psychology framed on the wall behind him.
It's a
But they
flex.
but they should know from him just off the cuff spitting Edgar Schein model of organizational culture right there that this man
That was sexy. That was well done.
clearly has mastered organizational psychology.
I love this stuff,
I
Alex. You know
think,
that.
but I think that's actually a really good point. Like I'll concede that because you know, as a coach, having stepped into high level organizations on the special operations side, like you come into that environment with this perspective of, you know, we do PT to perform better physically, physiologically, whatever. And that's a different optic than if, like you said, you're a leader who's looking at PT as a team building exercise or whatever. Because I would argue, you know, for that individual, it doesn't matter what you're doing on any given day. It could be anything. But from the coaching side, the sports medicine side, what you do is what makes the difference because you're looking at injury trends, you're looking at all these other things. And, you know, when I see somebody falling out on a run, I'm thinking, okay, what do I need to do physically to help that person perform better? If they get injured because, you know, whatever. Meanwhile, the leader that I'm kind of quote unquote fighting against might be saying, hey, it doesn't really matter. Like we identified an issue there because we did the thing. And so I see what you're getting at. I guess the question would be, how do you find a middle ground there?
Yeah, I think it's a new perspective. And you know, if it's challenging what framework someone's are they're currently operating with, but in a way that doesn't subordinate it to what you think. It's more like, hey, how can I help you achieve your goals? How do you see PT? Do you providing that framework, do you see it more as a leader development tool, or do you see it as an actual tool to enhance the functionality of your people? And then let's get some shared understanding on this topic. If they say it's leader development, then you say, well, how about what if I told you that we could do that and this? And convince them otherwise and give them a new framework, a new lens to see how this could be effective. And I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, all commanders think like me, but I'm hopeful that a sitting commander listening to an expert would say, you know what, let's try it out.
Mm-hmm.
So we've stumbled our way back into the MOPS and MOS framework, right? Measuring performance and measuring effectiveness. And I was just talking about it last night. Like the classic thing I always do with groups is we're talking about whether or not physical training is effective or not, is I ask them, how do you know if a workout was good? And the answers tend to be, did I get sore? Did I get tired? Did I get sweaty? And
This the
we
sauna
break
thing.
that down. We do the whole sauna thing. And then we
Yeah.
get to the point, which is that the only way to know whether it's effective is to have a goal and to measure progress towards that goal. So I think like Drew and I probably easily fall into the trap of thinking if we sat down and wrote down the goal of our physical training program, it would be various physiological adaptations. We want to see certain benchmarks achieved in various components of fitness and things like that. But I think the point being made here is from a commander's perspective, that is part of it. We should be enhancing people's fitness, but there are other goals that we should be stating and then measuring progress towards. And I'm curious, we've had many conversations about the application of MOPS and MOs beyond just fitness, but how would you articulate what those pieces of the goal of physical training are, and how would you measure whether they're working?
Oh my goodness. You know, yeah, Alex, I've called you on many occasions in the past about mops and mows, and it's just the application of, you know, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing right? And I can't ever get it correct. I'm like, which one is mop and which one is mow? And you helped me figure this whole thing out. I think, you know, as you're interfacing with this commander, if you can speak his language, you're like, hey, what are your what are your outcomes like? What do you want to see your formation get? If the PT is bleeding through everything the organization does, right? Like I want my leaders to know their people better, right? Well, how do you know that's happening? Well, there's a metric that I can see in a whole another setting where I can assess that. And that's what the commander's thinking about with some physical stuff sprinkled on there. So I think like, to Drew's point, if there's a way that there is some connective tissue between these two, ideological challenges or differences, both the fitness specialists and the command teams will do a much better job um, winning.
This is kind of this is kind of off the rails. Maybe this takes us in a different direction, but I'm curious because both of you guys have been around the military longer than me. But I'm thinking about this professional sport analogy that we always talk about, and in those environments, I mean, you mentioned Shawn earlier, sort of individualized training versus group type stuff. I'm wondering if there's a world where with military PT, it sort of maps onto a deployment cycle where for a couple of months you sort of just let your soldiers loose to do whatever they want, like an off season almost. And then X amount of months before the next kind of cycle, that's when you shift more into group PT mode. And so you give soldiers what it sounds like they want, which is some autonomy, but then you also bring it back into Shawn, I think your point, the leadership development piece. That's where the coach plays a bigger role. That's where you start to train towards a deployment. And it's a little bit more sport specific, quote unquote. But it seems like forcing some sort of like entrenched PT model year round, 24/7 is just creating a lot of friction. So I don't know if that could even work. I don't know if it makes sense. Um, but it came to mind as you guys were talking about that.
Well, Drew, I tell you, I'm not sure the reason, soldiers or uniformed personnel don't like organized PT is because they want to do it on their own. Frankly, I think some of them just don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And the accountability piece is critical. So I guess I want to hear more from you all in what you're seeing across the force. Like, do you think it's one more than the other, or what do you
I
see?
think it varies. I mean, I don't know. I feel bad saying this because I'm kind of involved in it, but group PT tends to sort of just favor your lowest common denominator. And so you always end up with guys and gals who will come after the fact and do additional PT or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and to your point, you do have a probably a larger than is comfortable percentage of people who just straight up don't want to do anything. And they ride profiles for their whole career. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
I'm Shawn will appreciate this because the organizational psychology piece of the conversation. But when we started this podcast, we thought we were going to talk mostly about like the X's and O's of how to train, and it very quickly
We
just went
try.
completely
Sometimes we
off
go
of that.
back.
We come back to it regularly, but we frequently end up in these conversations where like the thing that actually matters is culture. And so I think that as I think about the question, I think about the different settings I've been in and how it was different. My very first assignment was in an infantry battalion. My first battalion commander told us that if soldiers need additional PT on their own time, that means we have failed to provide them the physical training they deserve with the time
Mm.
that's been allotted for it. And that was on
Mm.
us as leaders to fix that. I kind of appreciate that perspective. It doesn't work in every organization. Colonel Saslov, if you're listening, you already know you're invited on the podcast. Come on down. General Saslov, correction, he's been promoted.
He's
Um,
not coming on now. He called him a
yeah, now I'm in
colonel.
trouble. Um, but I've seen other organizations now, and I can start to see the pros and cons of like what happens when you take away a little bit of the accountability piece, right? Like people know my day job now is with the Space Force. It's still part of the military. There's still a fitness test, but it's a very different culture. The jobs are much more technical, much less physical. And I tell you, every time my team runs a group physical training session, during the first few minutes of the workout, I am thinking to myself, wow, we really screwed up. This workout is way too easy. They're going to be pissed at us for not getting a good enough training session out of it. And then like 10 minutes later, somebody's passing out and people were like complaining that they were sore for days after the workout and it was absolutely wrecking them. And the reason, like bluntly, the reason is when the culture de-emphasizes physical fitness and you give that back to people to do individually, a lot of people will slide to a much lower place than you think they would. Like there's problems out here that are bad enough that I would worry about them even if it was Gen Pop. Like that's a realistic assessment of where the fitness level's at in the organization. And that is because of no organized PT.
Should those people be in the military in the first place?
I mean, the problem is the military is not flush with people that are trying to fill these positions. We have to take who we can get and
Yeah.
develop them effectively.
Right. Right.
It is our responsibility as an organization to take care of these people and help them meet the standard that we think they need to meet. And I would say, frankly, and I think I've said this on the podcast before, I know that my whole like career since active duty has been all about military human performance. I would rather eventually get farther upstream of this problem. I don't think the military is going to solve all these health and fitness problems that are actually just symptoms of societal level issues with valuing health and fitness. So like one day I would very much like to do this in a way that impacts public schools in America, right? Because that's where you're going to actually solve some of these problems. And I don't know. We've gone way off track now. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore, but we're experiencing
Yeah.
I
symptoms of
started
bigger
it.
cultural
It was my
problems.
fault.
Yeah, I think Alex, to your point, I do appreciate that reference. It's all about readiness, right? Like, I mean, I can't as a leader or a responsible steward of our profession allow anyone to get beneath a threshold of readiness. So accountability is critical, and it's a risk. It's an enormous risk to just cast our soldiers and say, hey, go figure it out. Do what you think is best for your body. Um, I mean, these are young people that they kind of lack the accountability piece, and just having a platform for them to be accountable. I mean, no one, I can't say no one, I don't want to be absolute, but there are a large amount of people that show up to PT that don't want to do PT. Um, and it requires motivation. How do you motivate them? There's a lot of people that, you take into a combat situation that would rather want to be home, and that's okay. But how do you motivate them to be there and keep them in the fight and ask them to sacrifice self for the greater good? These are practices that are done at a PT formation. You see, we're either in the war or we're training to go to the war, like period. Like that's kind of what we do in the army and other uniformed services. So in my mind, we're finding ways and mechanisms to reinforce that.
So where with that then, because I agree with you, where do civilian subject matter experts in human performance fit?
They're consultants, they're advisors, it's someone you can go to help vet that you're doing the right things and you're enhancing your processes and systems. They're not necessarily like, if there is a commander that has made the assessment to say, hey, I want a civilian to come in, and I hate to say a civilian, but an expert to come in and provide some expertise, like, then that commander should be able to do that. But if the commander has assessed, like, I want my NCO population to toil, I want them to leverage resources, I want them to figure it out. Then that's the prerogative of that commander. I can't tell you what's the better option, but for me personally, as a leader, I'm leveraging the expert all day.
See, that's interesting though, because I just go back to the counter argument of like marksmanship, for example. Like it's not your choice. We're going to that shooting course. It's being run by those experts. Like
I'll
whether,
put an asterisk on this.
please.
I'll interject briefly because Drew's initial exposure to the military was in special operations.
That's fair.
And
I have a very convoluted perspective.
I want to calibrate it to the conventional military and say that not a lot of conventional soldiers are ever going to go to a civilian run shooting
So
course.
we'll insert anything, insert whatever. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
But I think part of the piece of this is special operations in general is very open to consulting from experts that they believe are
And I
experts,
wonder
right?
why that is.
Once they've vetted the people, they are open to that outside input. The conventional army, at least in my perspective, is less open to it, but that's just because it's not part of the routine and part of the culture. They have to do more with less. They don't have the same budget per soldier as special operations does. So you have to be self-sufficient. That's part of the whole culture of the organization. And so when you've taught them to take ownership of all these things and just figure it out yourself without external resources, it's a little bit harder to say, hey, in this particular situation, we've decided you need the resources.
So,
So dial back your self-sufficiency mindset just for a minute. They're hesitant to do that because that's not how they grew up.
well, let me ask you this then. Are we addressing a shortfall by wrapping it in a costume of self-sufficiency and this argument of like, oh, we'll just do it ourselves? But truthfully, it's because we can't afford to do it any better.
I don't think I'd like to respond to this. So I think between the two cultures, special ops and then conventional, there's a difference between good and great.
Mhm.
One, there's an expectation to be great. You can't mass produce it, right? So you want tailored special training because of what these people are expected to do versus, the conventional army. And I hate to say it, it could make people cringe, but good is good enough, right? Because of just the different styles of mission sets that these two cultures are dealing with.
I want to take a chance to make a point that I've made in a lot of conversations with coaches out in the space that I think will be valuable here. Shawn said people might cringe at good is good enough, but in those environments, you can make a bigger difference in people's lives and organizations' effectiveness, right? And we'll use the sports thing for a second, but in the fitness world, people always look towards elite college or pro sport, right? As like the pinnacle. But if you're a strength and conditioning coach in those spaces, you're helping people move from like the 98th percentile to the 99th percentile or the 99.5 percentile to the 99.6 percentile. You can help people and you're helping people do great things, but
Mm.
you're making really small changes because they're already at such a high level. When you go out to organizations, whether it's maybe you're coaching high school sports, maybe you're coaching D3 college sports, or in the military setting, maybe you're not in special operations, maybe you're in conventional, you have the opportunity to change people's lives in a really dramatic way, to take an organization to the next level, to take an individual to the next level, to set them up for things down the road. So I think it's easy to think of it as less sexy. I think it's way more impactful. That's all.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, Alex.
Yeah. I mean, I forget who said it, but, and I'll probably piss off strength coaches, but something to the effect of like at the elite level, I think it was D1 or professional sport, whatever, like you could, you know, they're going to get better whether you're there or not. And I think
Your
that
job is
make,
to turn the lights on and make sure they don't get injured. Like,
yeah, exactly. But to your point, having kind of been on both sides of that fence, you do see much more opportunity to have an impact, which, but again, then kind of goes back to this, I guess, argument we're making of what role does this subject matter expert play in that culture change? Because I think, I mean, and this is just me, right? Like my ideal world would be one in which you have this human performance cell. We'll use the army that sits at kind of the brigade level, and then you've got these civilian experts that are pushed out to battalions, companies, whatever level, and you would have from within your population soldiers identified as kind of these graduate assistants, subject matter experts, whatever. And I know that the schools exist to do this, and we could argue if the length of those schools is appropriate as the curriculum, whatever. Everybody knows how I feel about the NSCA. Those guys would be the ones leading PT, but it would be at the behest of a coach, a professional who is writing the X's and O's, maybe alongside that soldier, but playing a role in the X's and O's, because I think that's where the injury prevention argument comes up. Whether PT serves to create a better environment or not, the fact of the matter is when people deadlift shitty, they're going to get hurt. When they run shitty, they're going to get hurt. I don't care how professionally developed they are as a leader. Like they're just going to, it's not going to end well. So I think that there's kind of a hybrid model, but I think Alex makes this point all the time. Like from the coaching side, we've got to get rid of the egos. And from the military side, we've got to get rid of the egos. Like it just has to be, we have to address the level of the soldier and get out of this mindset of like, oh, we know best because back in my day, and that goes on both sides. So that's just Drew's view. But I think it's right.
I'll I'll pivot us unless Sean has something else to riff on there.
Well, I was just thinking back to a scenario. It's anecdotal, and I'm the person who experienced it. But and I going back to my cadet days before I
Woo!
commissioned, uh,
Did you have a
you
reading
know,
list?
I oh heck no, I didn't even read that much back then.
Okay, because Alex,
I will
Yeah.
say I gotta call out Sean because I was prepping for making sure we could do this conversation in the right way. Sean, why does your LinkedIn not list your enlisted time?
That's a good question. I'm intentional about that. I like to be where I am. So a lot of people in a military setting, you got your Mustangs is what they would refer to me as because I have enlisted time. There is a perception associated with Mustangs, and I don't want to necessarily take that on. I want you to know me for who I am and not set me aside and say, oh, he's one of those Mustangs. I don't live on my enlisted time. I live on my time as an officer. That's who I present myself as. So
Okay, I
slam
respect it.
dunk.
yeah.
That was a slam dunk response. Well
Yeah.
played. Back to your anecdote.
Yeah, so my anecdote, when I was in ROTC, even when I was enlisted, I never maxed the APFT at the time because I'd maxed the push-ups, I'd maxed the sit-ups, but the run was just quite challenging for me. And I would always make an excuse for myself, like, oh, I'm bigger because I have these, ginormous arms and these ginormous legs. So I'm like,
For those
ah,
listening, he's not exaggerating, jacked out of his mind.
Well, he's wearing a big ass jacket, so you can't tell.
I do have to check real quick. Sean, did you compete in bodybuilding when you were in Europe?
I did,
How'd you
absolutely.
do?
I placed second in the European Championship. It was
For
pretty
those
sick.
listening, in the show notes for this episode, we'll include pictures of Sean's bodybuilding time. Alex, there's some homework for you.
No, I will need those pictures. Sean is harder to track down on the internet these days than he used to be. He's deleted a lot of social media, so
Back to the
I'm
anecdote.
gonna need some stage pictures, Sean.
Yeah. But anyway, I never maxed the APFT, and then when I became a junior, getting ready and prepped for my summer course where we get assessed against the other 5,000 cadets across the nation. So it's a very important camp. My instructor called me in a few months before that, and he says, "Hey, man, I'm super disappointed in you. I think that you can run faster than you are." And I'm telling him, I'm like, "Sir, I'm running. Yeah. I mean, look at me. I'm trying. I'm moving. I'm scoring a 289, a 290." And he was like, "Yeah, and just what do you don't deserve to lead soldiers, Sean. You don't deserve to lead." So, and that's all he needed to tell me. And I tell you what, I went to that camp and I ran a 12:26 and I maxed it for the very first time in my Army career. And the reason I tell this story is because maybe there's a sentiment in a commander's head or an organizational leader's head that you don't know my soldiers. You don't know what to say to them to get them to their next level of complexity. You might have the expertise in like how to do injury prevention or how to get a bigger bicep or whatnot, but if you're not in the psyche of that person, if you don't watch it or lead this person, then you can't really help them like I can.
Hmm. I know we're gonna keep going on this, but I would just shout out to the NSCA. Like maybe you require the tactical guys to like intern in a tactical organization or something.
Drew has lots of ideas about professional development requirements for coaches. That's a
Yeah,
conversation for another day. I will
separate
say,
podcast.
having first met Second Lieutenant Shawn Robertson after that part of his journey, I never could have imagined Sean getting less than a 300 on the APFT.
There you go.
And
And
a
I've been
600
slam
on
dunking those 600s, baby,
can you do
Oh
them back to
man.
back?
back to back.
Back to back to back?
Not back. I've not tried back to back to
The
back,
elusive
but
triple crown. Yeah, it's out there. What did
yeah.
we call it the first? We had a name. Was it triple crown?
I don't remember.
Oh man, we got to go back and find that one.
Is that a
Anyway,
Colonel Conkey shout out?
I think
Oh
so.
man. Do you know Colonel Conkey? He's
Oh,
phenomenal, man. I
we
think
know
he's
Colonel Conkey. He's been
yeah.
on the pod. Fantastic guest. He
Great.
messaged me. I think I finally responded to his DM. I think he messaged me yesterday asking about the pose drama. So I got to fill him in.
Mm,
Yeah. He's awesome. I'm glad he's already been on here.
So was I got to make sure I know how you was he back at West Point when you were there?
He was an RTO.
Okay,
Um, he was an RTO as I was moving to be the aide. That's when
got
he
it.
came in. Yeah.
Because I knew Major Conkey, DPE instructor, like
Mm.
absolutely savage level of fitness.
He's still savage.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, he did two back-to-backs, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's savage.
600s.
Yep.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, I'm gonna hard pivot the topic a little bit to one I was hoping to get into here. And Sean, I will preamble this one by saying this is a question that I did ask General Gilland, and with love, he kind of dodged that question. He didn't really answer it, I'll be honest.
The one you're about to ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I get why he has to dodge the question to a certain degree, but I'm hoping you can be a little more candid on it. We'll see. I asked him about sleep stuff, and for him specifically, I asked about sleep for West Point cadets because there's been some pretty solid literature assessing sleep habits, sleep hygiene for those cadets, and they're all sleep deprived. We just know that. You've been an instructor there, or you've been a TAC there, you've been an aide there, you've been involved in cadet life, and I'm curious both for specifically cadets, but also for the Army at large. Do we undervalue sleep to the detriment of acquiring skill, maintaining skill, staying healthy, all these things? Because I think we kind of like say all the right things about we think sleep is important, but then we set up systems that don't really allow for people to get a healthy amount of sleep.
Oh, right on. I mean, this is quite simple. I don't remember him. He doesn't dodge questions, in his defense. I will say, I I I don't think you're saying do we undervalue, I wouldn't use that word. I think people value sleep. We don't get enough sleep because we're asking more of ourselves and more of our units than we can do in a reasonable day. So what ends up happening is your sleep becomes a casualty, which then makes you stop taking care of yourself in other ways because you have loads and loads of requirements that are levied onto you. So I would say we are doing too much. We're
Okay.
just doing too much. Yeah.
I'll take that as a reasonable answer. I have, it's like, here are my foundational concerns with the whole issue. One is, you said earlier, we're either at the war or we're training for the war, which means if we're not at war, our whole job is to be building skills.
Mm.
And sleep is foundational to learning, retention of skill, accuracy, all of these things that are super important to that. And I often wonder if we removed the extra work we were doing, replaced it with sleep. And I know that if you give soldiers time, they're not necessarily going to use that time for sleep. That's a whole separate conversation.
They'll be
But
vaping in their car.
I mean, we'll get there. But if you took a little bit of that work away, gave them sleep, maybe you wouldn't need to do as much work because they could acquire and retain skills more
Dude, don't
easily.
get me started.
That's certainly in an ideal world. The other piece of it that I worry about is that we know different people have different sleep needs, right? The need for sleep is normally distributed. Some people can thrive on less sleep, some people need more. And I worry that the military does a great job of finding people who don't need as much sleep and promoting them to the highest levels of leadership because they thrive in that sleep deprived environment. And and I worry about whether those people can recognize that they need less sleep than most people and not try to enforce the exact same thing on people who do need more sleep than them. Those are my two biggest, like, I wonder if we're playing ourselves with the whole sleep deprivation
The
thing. Because
problem is because I agree, like this is what I was thinking about when I said don't get me started, because I'm literally doing this right now for some of my soldiers. My thought would be you cannot break this busy versus productive conundrum that the army and the military lives in
Mm.
until you change the way the career trajectory happens. Because this OER and COER system, where like, yeah, the smart play would be to work, quote unquote, work less, sleep more, prioritize whatever. But if you're not churning out bullshit, you're not going to get enough bullets. You're not going to get promoted. Alex, how many times have we had shit hot guests come on? And then when it's all said and done, we're like, man, it's a real shame that guy's not in charge of stuff. Well, it's because he's not like playing the game. I mean, it's so I'm ranting a little bit because I see this every day, but I think it goes beyond sleep and it's just this activity versus achievement. Like, are you guys actually doing anything or are you just building PowerPoints for the sake of building PowerPoints? I rest my case.
Oh, no, I have nothing else to add to that, Drew. That's brilliant. You
Boom.
you said it right. It's
I've never been to Columbia
yeah,
and I nailed it.
it's this idea that I have to be at work, portraying that I'm like tired and giving my best in order to secure this evaluation and to convince my leadership that I care more than everyone else that
The
has
next
have
person.
left and has a more balanced or type of life that they're living with kids and stuff like that. So I agree
I'm
with
pretty
you.
sure when I visited and stayed at Sean's house, he got back from work at like 9 p.m. and left again for work at like
Well, then
4 a.m. the
the
next
note
day.
I'm seeing, Sean can't see this Google Doc, but I believe this was Alex. Sean's sleep habits are trash, but he continues to perform at a high level anyway. I don't.
Well, hey, look, Alex, you're right, but you'd be proud of me. I've improved.
Look at
I
you.
definitely I value sleep. You can ask Jordan, my wife. I'm getting like 5 to 6 now. I used to
Oh
get 3 to 4
God.
every night. Yeah,
What? You're
yeah, man,
taking
I'm doing a
naps.
lot better.
He was ACFT 600s on 3 to 4 hours of sleep. This man's a
Oh
savage.
yeah. Oh
Well, I mean,
yeah.
I think, and Sean, maybe with your degrees and this type of stuff, and you guys' experience in the military, like we kind of skirt this conversation quite a bit. I just kind of did it there, and like, sure, this is a human performance podcast, but like, man, I think that there's so many. Maybe they're not small levers, maybe they're big levers that you could pull to get around that kind of cultural professional treadmill that just grinds people and destroys people because you don't see that. I don't think you really see that as much in a corporate setting. And a lot of leaders in the military pay lip service to things like sleep or behavioral health or, PT, whatever. But those are often the same people who aren't sleeping, who aren't showing up to PT, who are dealing with a bunch of like family issues, financial, whatever. We're all dealing with something. But I just wonder if there's a way to like put the car in reverse and back out of this system we've created, or is it just something that's never going to fix itself and we're just going to keep throwing money at the problem and cross our fingers and hope that it fixes? I don't know what the answer is because I'm not in the military, but as somebody who rates on soldiers and has to play this game, it is one of the dumbest things I have ever seen in my life. Like, how are you expecting this to create anything positive?
Yeah.
Let's fix the army
Yeah.
right now, guys.
Yeah. I
And
mean, I've sat and listened to general officers, encourage soldiers to get more sleep. And I oftentimes think like, did you get there getting sleep? Did
No,
you
there's no
become a
way.
general officer getting sleep? So it's like, but they see the light as they grow up in the army and they get to a certain level, and it's like, man, I would have slept more. But the question is, you're advocating for more sleep, but how do you change the system to assess that that's positive? Especially if you are comparing it to someone that is not sleeping and that's always there in the organization. It's hard.
and there's the problem we briefly mentioned but didn't really dig into, which is that if you gave people back the time, would they use it for sleep? And and that's never
Right.
guaranteed. It's the same as the organized PT question. Like if you gave people back that time, would they use it for exercise?
But
Maybe.
I think
Some
I
will,
think
not all.
the problem is because I hear this counter argument a lot, and I think the issue here is that there's an expectation where if we change X, will Y start the next day? And no, it won't. Like if we give soldiers back some time, inevitably there's going to be a period where they just fuck it up. Like yeah, they're vaping in their car, and it may take some time to get to where you want to go, but I think that there's a fear of that in between time that just keeps us in the status quo. And then nothing ever changes because, oh, if we give them back their time, will they actually sleep more? Probably not for a while. And the ones that are shitheads will get weeded out, but like eventually we'll get to a culture where that does prioritize sleep. It may take a little bit, but I think because you exist in this 2 year PCS cycle where you have to make an impact before you go somewhere else, nobody's really playing the long game until they're in that general officer role, like you talked about, where they do see the light. Because at that point, they're kind of like nobody's going to tell them no. So I
Right.
think it's a combination of a lot of things, but again, we could go so far off the rails away from human performance getting into this whole conversation.
No, this is a part of it though. But I'll tell you, I'm thinking about different theories that come to mind with this problem set that we currently face. And I think about Kurt Lewin's change model. It's very simple. It's unfreeze, change, refreeze. So if you want to change something in your organization, you have to first unfreeze it, turn it into like a liquid, do what you need to do to change it, get the buy-in, and then refreeze something else. I think the challenge in with this topic is unfreezing it. Like we're
Hmm.
not even like changing. We're just stuck in a frozen cube. Um, so I'm hopeful that we can someday get it to a liquid, then to refreeze it into something else.
Well, on that note, I want to ask you the topic that you've called me a few times to talk about. I want to bring it onto the podcast here a little bit because we haven't done this much, but applying the MOPS and MOS framework to topics other than human performance. I think, I mean, I routinely find out that people have followed MOPS and MOS for a long time and still don't know what the hell I mean when I'm talking about measures of performance and measures of
Is
effectiveness.
it only a military thing?
Technically, it came from systems engineering before it was in doctrine, but almost every reference I find to it
Okay,
is military.
fair. Carry
But
on.
but it's not specifically a way to assess anything about human performance. It's just a lens I liked that's a way normally used by the military to assess like large scale operations, like strategic level assessments.
Yep.
And I'm curious, Shawn, because you've brought it up to me a bunch of times, where you think we should be applying it that would be more productive than just having the conversation around human performance.
Dude, like throughout my career, I've used it, personally to set my personal goals. I use the mop mode concept, and that's why I've called you, many times. And as a company commander, I used it. As a tactical officer at West Point, I used it. And using it, what I mean is like pulling out a spreadsheet and taking time in quiet and like really putting things out there like here's what I want to do and here's how I know I did it right. Like this is the sign that or the metric that I'm looking for to know I did it right. I I hate to disappoint you, Alex, but that's not happening everywhere in the army. It doesn't
Certainly,
happen. And people
obviously.
say it. Yeah, people
Yeah.
say it. I sit in meetings and they're like, "Well, you got to know your measure of effectiveness. You
Oh,
got to know."
jeez.
And
Yep.
a lot of people don't know what they're saying. That's why I called you multiple times. I'm like, Alex, remind me. You're the expert on this. Like, tell me. Um, so I hate to disappoint you, but we should be using that because when you talk about moving the organization from good to great, like the only way you can effectively or confidently say that you've made it to the great is to understand what you're looking for. And if you haven't mapped that out in doing that assessment, then you're full of shit.
Dude, the nut like yeah, I agree with you mostly because I've never well, I shouldn't say this because people I work for listen to these things, but like most most meetings in the military are pointless. It's the meeting in the hallway after the meeting where the stuff actually happens. That would be kind of the measure of effectiveness is like how many people lingered in the hallway. The measure of performance is like,
Dude,
oh,
that's it.
how many slides did we have? Like, come on.
That's
Um,
it.
yeah, that's my thought.
I do feel for all of the like brand new field grade officers around the military who are trying to figure out the MOPS and MOS stuff for their courses. Because if when I Googled MOPS and MOS like 3 years ago, when I was like first starting this journey or whatever, you found a bunch of Army references, you found a bunch of DoD references, whatever.
Now it's just us.
Now, if I Google MOPS and MOS on the first page of Google results, there is one result from doctrine.airforce.mil, and every other result is just our content about fitness.
Well,
Like
Wow.
and
you're gonna get a video about the standing power throw, and you're gonna be like, "What's
we've
going on?"
spent $0 on search engine optimization. So our measure of performance is, would that make that low, but effectiveness is quite high? I don't know how we would measure that.
Well, I have
We're just
because you
ruining
bring it up.
careers.
It's a little bit ironic that we don't have very clearly stated mops and mows for mops and mows.
Oh, we don't at all.
But I will say one thing we learned really early. Like a measure of performance for a podcast episode is how many downloads it gets. Measure of performance for a social media post is how many likes it gets. But those have nothing to do with effectiveness. The measure of effectiveness for these episodes, like even if they have way fewer downloads, if they're getting talked about by the right people in the right places and they're actually changing something, like that's the effectiveness. And it doesn't even seem to really correlate with the number of downloads or the number of interactions or anything like that. They seem entirely disjointed from each other.
Which, just to bring this back to human performance, like using PT tests as measures of effectiveness are stupid. Like that's my issue that I have with some of this is like how do you capture the effectiveness of a embedded human performance team if most of it has to do with building effective relationships?
Mm.
Like you can't and I think when we and
Do
I'm
you want
kind
to
of
state Hammond's law for the audience?
yeah, well you state it. It sounds douchey
So
coming from me. I made it up.
I did check. I could not find it stated anywhere else on the internet. So Drew
It's
does
because I
get
made it
to
up.
lay claim to it. And this spiraled off of the conversation about how I completely disagree with the statement, what gets measured gets managed. Like that,
Good hearts
the
does
guy
it.
who coined, that's not Good Hearts. Good Hearts is related but separate. Come on, Drew.
Sorry.
Um, that was Drucker, I think, Peter Drucker. But when he wrote about it, what he was trying to say is that it's a trap that organizations fall into, that what gets measured gets managed. He wasn't advocating for it. He was saying it's a trap that you have to watch out for. So then
Mm.
Drew's corollary is, so Hammond's law
The Hammond
is
corollary.
what gets measured gets managed, but what needs to be managed isn't always measurable.
Boom.
We
Mm.
start chasing the metrics we can measure just because you can put them on a chart, and we start missing the things that actually matter because they were hard to measure. And that's
Mm.
the real core of the problem.
Well, you say it well, and you just had a post about it the other day, I think, where you talked about the argument for like the return on investment stuff when it comes to human performance. And you can explain it better than I can, but well, you explain it.
So
Military hardware.
the one I put up is that if if a military vehicle is like if a tank is broken, nobody asks what the return on investment for getting the repair part installed is. The return on investment is the thing works. If a plane is down, nobody asks what the return on investment for getting it back in the air is. The return on investment is the thing works. But when a human is broken, all of a sudden we want to see how fixing it actually saves us money in the long term, or else it's not worth it. And that is troubling when what we do is all about humans. And I know that tanks never refrad and leave the military. And I know that like you don't have to ask a tank how intrinsically motivated it is to shoot that day. Like humans are more complicated than machines, and this is not a thing that you can put a dashboard on. But we are much better at keeping track of easily quantifiable things than we are of subjective fuzzy things like humans. And that leads us to focus on them more than they necessarily deserve to be focused on, right? And that will bring this back to Shawn's whole thing, organizational culture, organizational leadership. That's a space that's full of things that are kind of hard to measure,
Right.
but that doesn't mean they're not important.
Right. No, you're right. It's my thing. I talk to people on my off time. I'm always talking to, people in tech companies or, friends in the military who struggle with different type of leadership stuff and culture stuff. And it always goes back to like, how do I know if I'm doing this thing right? Um, and it's that feel good thing. It's the soft skill. And I have this pitch. I'm like, hey, you gotta offer people the soft skills that make the hard skills work. The soft skills being emotional intelligence, a soft skill being motivation, like that. Those types of things get the hard skills to be and function a little bit more effectively. But people don't spend a lot of time on it. You can't see it.
Hmm. I don't think we have enough time left on the episode because we're already up against the hour mark to come up with what are the measures of effectiveness for leadership.
I mean, I don't know. Does the military have an appetite for just like leaving it up to the eye test? I mean, it's hard though, because I don't know, man. Like something about, I could be wrong here, but my perception is that there is something about the human performance conversation with military leadership where it's just we're constantly looking to how can we cut this program? How can we make this program cheaper? How can we make it more? I mean, they'll wrap it up in words like more efficient and blah 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 blah, but really what they're looking at is like how can we cut corners here? But out of the other side of their mouth, they'll say things like people first. And I think people that have listened to this podcast know how I feel about the people first thing. Like that was always going to be bullshit. I think it was when I was with the Air Force towards the end of my time, the commander, I think his thing was like people first, mission always, which like fundamentally doesn't make sense because if it's mission always, it can't like nobody checked him on that. Um, but I don't see that same thing happening with hardware and other things. Like for some reason, it's the people part of the equation where we're trying to make things cheaper, and somebody's going to rip me apart for that, probably rightly so. But that's just my perception when it comes to kind of that conversation you had, Alex, on Instagram about the return on investment with hardware versus why are we constantly looking for a return on investment in people first programs? Just let them run. And
Well, one thing that's made it hard for me is like going on a year or two now. I've checked the DoD contracts page roughly once a week just to see what contracts are getting awarded and how much they're for and what they're for and all that kind of stuff. And I remember like when we like at the outset of the holistic health and fitness program, it was astonishing to invest $1 billion in human performance. And if I've got my numbers right, it was $1 billion over the course of 10 years to get this resource out to close to like 1 million people. Well, no, because the original fielding only accounted for, we'll say 500,000 people. That's a lot of money to invest in human performance. But what has changed as I monitor the contracting page is I start to get a different idea of what a lot is in terms of money to the Department of Defense.
yeah,
Last week, the Department of Defense awarded a $2 billion contract for pharmaceuticals,
Mhm.
right? Like, how much is a lot? I don't know. In the same week, we awarded a $2 billion contract for pharmaceuticals and a $25 million contract for fruits and vegetables. So the pharmaceutical investment was 40 times bigger than the fruits and vegetables investment. And I don't know how many other pharmaceutical contracts there are, and I don't know how many other food contracts there are. And I don't know if you totaled those things up, how they would compare to each other. But it seems like it's easier to spend money on things that go to something easily quantified or that sit in a motor pool or that shoot across the sky and blow up. And it's a lot harder to spend money on things that are investments in like the health, wellness, and performance of humans because they're hard to measure.
I just always go back to it costs an F-35 $30,000 an hour to fly. That's my metric.
I don't think it's about, hard or easy, Alex. I think it goes back to the cultural nuance of, is a commander or a decision maker, is he transactional or transformational? Someone
West
that
Point's
is
proud of you right
more
now, Sean. BSNL is
is
super proud.
shout out to Colonel Spain. If someone is more transformational, then yeah, they're going to invest in human development. They're going to invest in fitness, the things you really cannot see, right? It's like stretching before your workout or stretching after your workout. I don't, you guys are the scientists here. I'm not sure which way it goes,
Both
but whenever you're supposed to stretch, you're
and sleep.
stretching y- and sleep because you can't see those gains, right? That's someone more transformationally aligned, but transactional. Hey, I got 1 year or 2 years as a commander to do something that is going to boost my reputation in order for me to do the next thing, for me to boost my reputation in that next thing. I'm not thinking about doing things that's transformational.
So do transformational leaders get promoted in the military?
I hope so, Drew.
They don't. Stop it. They don't.
I, I'll share a little bit. I'll try and make this podcast happen eventually with this particular commander, but I have seen, and my perspective was limited. I don't know the full context of all the situations, right? But from from my vantage point, I have seen transformational leaders who really care about their people and making those differences succeed, but it's usually in spite of that style of leadership, not
Hmm.
because of it. Like they usually have to make sacrifices in
Mm,
terms of their career potential to do those things. And I think at
yep.
a certain point in your career, you just make that decision.
Mm,
Unfortunately, though, those people aren't the ones who promote all the way up to like affect large scale change. And again, I don't know how true that is in like non-military settings. It may be that Google is the same way. I have no idea. But it just seems very, very obvious in the military setting. And again, some of this has to do with what we were just bitching about earlier with rating schemes and all of that. But you have to almost be transactional in order to survive. And so
yeah.
yeah, maybe it's obviously much broader than just the human performance question, but like, how do you change that so that transformational leadership on all levels is recognized and rewarded? I don't know the answer.
Or the problem would have been fixed.
Yeah.
We have to unfreeze it first.
I could give you a process to do it.
Oh man. What you guys have anything left to fight about? Or are we all
I
friends?
mean, we didn't really fight very much. Sean, what did we
Uh,
not talk about here that we should have?
that's a great question. I think I mean, touched on most things. Not sure I would have another topic to introduce.
If you had the key, I'll ask you my keys to the castle question before we let you go. If you had the keys to the castle, if you were in charge of the army, well, let's go bigger. If you're in charge of the military for a day, what would you change?
Woo!
We can edit out the silence, take as long as you need.
That's a big question.
Well,
That's
you
a
have the
big
Columbia
question.
jacket on, you have the masters in organization, you have all the things. They're on the wall behind you. I see those
Yeah, let
coins
me
in your little coin holder.
let me think about this one. I could change one thing about the army.
Doesn't have to be one thing. You
Well,
can do whatever you want. You're in charge.
yeah.
If it helps, I'd make fast food illegal on military installations. But
You can raise the passing standard on the 2 mile run.
Uh,
that's a pencil whip. He's got all day. He's in charge all day. He can do whatever he wants.
Mm.
Man, I never thought of this question. One thing. Yeah, it makes me want to think about what frustrates me about the military most.
Oh, things frustrate Sean about the military every day. I know it.
Ah, 1 second. Hmm.
I will buy time for Sean to think by telling a story that I think is really cool. Sean, don't get distracted by the story. You got to think about the
He's still
question. You got to
thinking. Yeah,
focus.
you're in charge. We're over here just
And
bullshitting.
Go ahead, go
this
ahead,
this
go
will
ahead.
save time because I would have to work it in the intro otherwise. But when I first met Sean, he was fresh out of ROTC, and as an ROTC grad should do, he talked a ton of shit about West Point. That's just necessary and appropriate and part of how everything works. A few years later, Sean's gone through a couple assignments. He's Captain Robertson now. He's going to be a TAC officer at West Point. Hasn't had a first sip of Kool-Aid yet. I don't know how you felt about going into that program, but once he got there, he was all in. And then I got
Shows
to
up to
visit Sean.
Hogwarts.
I got to visit Sean when he was General Gilland's aide. And one of the coolest experiences I have had, and Sean, I don't know if I articulated this to you in the moment, how cool it was. But Sean had to go do something. I don't remember what. He's like, hop in with me. We hop in this little golf cart and we're zipping across West Point on whatever errand Sean has to go on. And Sean stops, I swear, every 50 meters or so because we're passing a cadet that he knows that he has had an interaction with. One cadet's leaving on a ruck, but he hasn't shown Sean his properly shined shoes because Sean made a correction on his shoes the other week and he hasn't forgotten. And Sean corrects him and we zip off and he stops again 50 meters later because there's another cadet he knows that he has to talk to. Sean knew everyone. I don't know how long you got to spend there, how many years it was, but man, the impact he had on that place was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Alex. And that
So
was
how
a
would you
huge
change?
distraction to think
How
think
would you
about
change
what I
the
need to
army?
think about. So I guess I don't know how. What would I change though? What would I change? Somehow we need to give our younger people more airtime. We have these generational divides, and they create conflict between the different generations in terms of communication. So the more older senior people think that the junior younger people don't understand how to communicate. It's not that they don't understand how to communicate, they just do it differently. And I think we have to be open to how younger people are choosing to express themselves and convey their ideas, because they are the ones that's going to make our army better.
Boom. Wow, we've been doing this too long. We just boomed at the same time. Okay, well, Shawn, let me be the first to thank you for coming on. I know we literally just met right before we started, but
I'm honored.
you and Alex may remain frenemies, but you and I can be buddies.
No, I appreciate that, gentlemen. Thanks for offering me the space to learn with you. I appreciate it. I look forward to listening to us and relearning what I just learned about on this episode.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
A slightly different direction than where we normally go, but nonetheless, I think certainly one of my most fun episodes in recent memory. Just a super easy conversation about some pretty wide-ranging topics. I'll turn it over to you because I know you're sitting on some stuff.
I mean, I don't have anything crazy to say other than kind of what you already said, which is that we have observed in the past that some of our episodes are pretty scripted. Like we ask them a question, they give us an answer.
We didn't touch the document this time.
Yeah. So like that's what Drew has described as a working man's podcast, where we ask a bunch of questions and they answer a bunch of questions.
Mhm.
On this particular episode, first off, we barely had a notes sheet. And we did not touch that notes sheet. Like usually we're typing back and forth to each other, coming up with what to say and what we're doing. There was nothing. There was zero need for anything. We just had a conversation with Shawn. And that's historically how we tell that an episode is going to be pretty awesome.
Well, and so here's my thought. And we talked about this a little bit, the three of us, after we stopped recording, but I'll repeat it here. You might have actually mentioned it. I think people come to a human performance podcast expecting, should I back squat? Should I front squat? How many reps? How many sets? What weight? And we do that. I mean, like for sure, that's, it's good to have those conversations. But if you've been in this game for any period of time and you still think that is the difference maker, then I think you're totally missing the point. And conversations with guys like Shawn, and we've had several conversations like this now, we'll continue to have them. Like that to me just elucidates what's missing in, I mean, I'll go at the NSCA again, like just formal coaching education. Like we get so hung up on barbell placement and whatever, and that stuff's great, but it's relationship building, it's leadership, it's organizational psychology. That's the stuff that makes the biggest difference. And so I would love to see more conversations around that when I get on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever group of coaches versus like, hey man, what's your total? Like, who gives a shit? So I'm ranting a little bit, but when we have conversations with guys like Shawn, it just brings me back to that point, which is that, man, if you're still sitting there wondering if you should have your tactical athletes front squat or back squat, you are so far off. They should back squat.
I'm fishing here and I'm not coming up with what I'm looking for, but I'm wondering if there's like a corollary to Hammond's law that like what's easy to put on a PowerPoint slide gets taught, but what needs to be taught isn't easy to put on a PowerPoint slide.
You've just restated my law with the word PowerPoint.
But it's teaching instead of management, though. Like
so that can be
it is
corollary.
very hard.
That's the Morrow corollary.
Yeah, exactly. I said it was a
law.
corollary. Yeah,
it's the corollary to the corollary. We're just restating. But yes, your point holds.
It's very hard to teach people how to form relationships other than just them going out into the world and forming relationships. It's very hard to teach people organizational culture without them going out and experiencing organizations and leading in them. Like Shawn dropped a bunch of goodness straight out of a master's degree in organizational psychology, but none of that means anything until you have the hands-on tangible experience of working in organizations and trying to change them.
We talked about it a little bit in the episode. I don't know if the military is primed for that.
It's still frozen.
It's still frozen, and you could talk about how PCS cycles hamper that. You could talk about how rating schemes hamper that. You could talk about. I don't know, man. That's the biggest rabbit hole we've ever stumbled upon. Is like, how do you actually change the military?
Well, it sounds like it's a topic we'll be returning to.
I think it should be, because again, I said this in the episode, and I'll say it again. Like, you can hear your girlfriend there in the background, probably singing Chappelle Roan.
She's getting annoyed at us for continuing to record.
I think that there are a lot of implications to human performance when we think about just the culture at large, and maybe changing some of that helps people perform better. I love that she's in the background just singing.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna get in trouble. I think I have to go watch a show or something.
Awesome. Well, guys, you heard it here first. Alex's girlfriend is pushing us off air, but we will see you again next week.
I'm coming, Emily.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.